62,000 voices silenced in a single stroke of a pen, one congressional district erased, one seat carved out of existence, and one woman, Jasmine Crockett, thrust into the center of a storm bigger than herself. How do you explain to a community that their representation, their voice, their power was not lost at the ballot box, but stolen in the quiet machinery of redistricting? How do you explain to families in Dallas, in South Oak Cliff, in neighborhoods where every election is a fight for survival, that the very map of their democracy has been redrawn against them? This is not a story about a single politician. It's a story about what happens when those in power decide which communities matter and which communities disappear. Because redistricting is not just lines on paper, it's a weapon. Sharpened over decades, aimed at the heart of political participation, and in Texas, that blade has been unsheathed with precision. Jasmine Crockett, a freshman Democrat, lawyer, by training, firebrand by instinct, came into Congress with a reputation for refusing to back down. She fought in committee hearings, she clashed with Republicans, and she carried with her the weight of communities who had long felt ignored. But in the halls of Austin, Republicans were preparing a different kind of battle, not against Crockett personally, but against the demographics she represents. The 2020 census showed Texas booming in population, gaining nearly 4 million new residents, most of them Latino, Black, or Asian American. The data was clear. The future of Texas politics was multiracial, urban, and diverse. But when it came time to draw the new maps, Republicans in control of the legislature did not create new districts to reflect that diversity. Instead, they redrew the lines in ways that secured their power for another decade, often by cracking apart communities of color or packing them so tightly that their influence was diluted everywhere else. And that's where Crockett's seat became a target. Her district, centered in Dallas, had been a platform for progressive voices, for challenges to Republican dominance, and for the kind of coalition building that unsettled the status quo. But when the maps were unveiled, the contours of her district shifted, folded, and eventually collapsed into something unrecognizable. It wasn't just Crockett's political future on the line, it was the representation of thousands who had fought for a seat at the table. This is the paradox of redistricting. It happens every 10 years, with hearings and legal jargon, but its impact is felt in every law passed, every policy enforced, every vote that counts or doesn't count. And for communities of color, in Texas, it has been a relentless cycle. The Voting Rights Act once stood as a shield, requiring states with histories of discrimination, like Texas, to get federal approval before changing their maps. But in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down that requirement in Shelby County v. Holder, opening the floodgates for maps drawn without oversight. Since then, Texas has repeatedly been challenged in court for maps that dilute minority voting power. And yet, year after year, decade after decade, the maps hold. Jasmine Crockett's district was not erased in a vacuum. It was erased in a state where power is calculated in margins of control, where every lost Democratic seat shores up Republican majorities in Washington. And the people who suffer most are not the politicians, they are the residents whose hospitals close because funding disappears, whose schools crumble because budgets are slashed, whose neighborhoods are cut out of the lines of opportunity. Think of a grandmother in Dallas who has voted faithfully for decades, believing her voice mattered. Overnight, she finds herself in a district where her vote is swallowed by rural counties with different priorities, different needs, different representatives who do not speak her language literally or politically. Think of young activists who knocked on doors, rallied neighbors, fought for criminal justice reform, only to see their movements split across multiple districts, each one too weak to make a difference. This is how democracy is structured, with an outright denial of the ballot, but with maps that decide the outcome before the first vote is cast. Crockett's response was not silence. She called it out, naming the injustice for what it was. But in Texas politics, calling it out is not enough. Republicans defend their maps as legal, neutral, colorblind, even while data scientists and civil rights groups reveal how race and partisanship are baked into the very lines. Federal lawsuits have been filed, the Department of Justice has stepped in, but court battles move slowly while elections happen fast. And so communities are forced to live under maps that strip them of power. While waiting years for a verdict that may come too late, The story of Jasmine Crockett's eliminated seat is not unique. It is part of a national pattern where red states lock in power and blue states scramble to resist. North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Ohio all battlegrounds in the war over maps. But Texas is different because of its size, its growth, its role as a political giant. The stakes here are national. Every seat lost in Texas is one less vote in Congress for policies on health care, climate, voting rights, immigration. Every district erased is a step toward a future where demographics change but power does not, and the emotional toll is heavy. Imagine being told, in essence, that your community doesn't count, that the decades of struggle, the marches, the court cases, the hard-won victories of the civil rights era can be undone with the stroke of a legislative pen. It feels like betrayal. It feels like history repeating itself. And yet, this is the reality. When people say democracy is on the ballot, this is what they mean, not just who gets elected, but who gets to vote in meaningful districts, who gets to send someone like Jasmine Crockett to Washington, who gets to be heard without fair maps. Everything else is compromised. Crockett's elimination is not the end of her story. Politicians adapt, find new districts, run statewide. But for her constituents, the ones who trusted her to carry their voices, it is a wound. And wounds like this do not heal easily because they are reminders of how fragile representation really is. That is the truth hidden beneath the numbers. The hearings, the lawsuits, behind every district line, there are human lives. And when a seat is eliminated, those lives are pushed further from the center of power, further from justice, further from the democracy they were promised. And so, the fight continues. Jasmine Crockett's seat eliminated by Republicans in Texas redistricting fight. 50 years of struggle for voting rights, 5 decades of marches, lawsuits, blood spilled on bridges, and prayers whispered in polling places. And yet, in Texas, the question echoes again. Who gets to decide where power lives? When Jasmine Crockett's district was erased, it wasn't just a technical maneuver, it was a message sent to every community of color that dared to organize, dared to grow, dared to demand a share of Texas's future. That message was simple. Your numbers may rise, but your influence will be contained. The irony is bitter. Texas gained 2 new congressional seats after the 2020 census too. The population growth that fueled that gain came almost entirely from Latino, Black, and Asian American residents. Yet, when the maps were drawn, both of those seats were designed to favor Republicans, not the communities who created them. That's not democracy. That's engineering. It is power-bending data to its will. And it explains why civil rights groups called the maps some of the most egregious in modern history. To understand the magnitude of this, you have to step back. Redistricting is not just about lines, it's about what issues dominate in Washington. Take healthcare. In Crockett's old district, hospital closures, maternal mortality, and Medicaid expansion were urgent priorities. But when those communities are fractured and submerged into districts, represented by lawmakers with different agendas, those issues fall to the bottom of the pile. Or criminal justice reform. Crockett had been a leading voice for rethinking policing, for ensuring accountability, split her base, and suddenly those voices are drowned out by rural majorities less inclined to pursue reform. Policy doesn't just shift, it evaporates. This is the structural violence of gerrymandering. You don't see it on the evening news the way you see protests or hearings, but you feel it in classrooms underfunded, in roads unrepaired, in the absence of investment in communities that are told implicitly that their votes matter less. And this isn't an accident. The architects of the maps use software so precise, so detailed, that they can predict outcomes years in advance. They know where every block leans, where every family votes, where every community could rise. And with a few strokes, they cut, they splice, they dilute. It's surgical, and it's devastating. Jasmine Crockett spoke about this not as an abstraction, but as a betrayal of her own community. A daughter of Dallas, a public defender turned legislator, she carried stories of clients who couldn't afford bail, neighbors who couldn't afford health care, families who worked 3 jobs and still struggled. Her seat gave those stories a platform. Without it, the platform shrinks. And yet, for Republicans in Austin, this was the point. They defend their actions as compliance with the law, as politics as usual. But the truth is written. Into the demographics, Texas is diversifying faster than almost any state in the nation, and the party in power is building a fortress to resist that tide. Consider the legal backdrop. Since Shelby County v. Holder in 2013, Texas has been free to implement maps without preclearance from the Department of Justice. Before that, every map had to pass federal review to ensure it didn't discriminate. Since then, every decade, Texas has been sued, and every decade, courts have found evidence of intentional discrimination. Yet, by the time rulings arrive, elections have already taken place, results already locked in, policies already passed. This is why the elimination of Crockett's seat feels so heavy. It's not just about her, it's about the system that allows this to keep happening. Imagine watching your community grow stronger, younger, more engaged, only to see that growth neutralized by a handful of legislators in Austin. Imagine explaining to your children that yes, they have a right to vote, but the map is drawn so their vote won't change much. How do you sustain faith in democracy under those conditions? And yet, people tried. Civil rights groups filed lawsuits. Within hours of the map's release, activists organized teach-ins, rallies, awareness campaigns. Crockett herself spoke at events, reminding people that silence is surrender. She refused to let the narrative be that her district was erased quietly. She wanted the nation to see. Because Texas is not isolated. The battle over its maps is a mirror of America itself. In Georgia, after record black turnout flipped the state blue in 2020, Republicans passed restrictive voting laws and redrew maps to weaken minority influence. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis muscled through maps that eliminated a black majority district entirely. In North Carolina, courts swing back and forth over maps so aggressively partisan that experts call them egregious outliers. Everywhere you look, the story is the same: demographics shifting, power structures resisting, and every time, it is communities of color who pay the price. Crockett's elimination symbolizes that clash in its purest form. Her district embodied the future of Texas politics, multiracial, progressive. Its disappearance signals the lengths to which the present powers will go to delay that future. But delay is not defeat. That's the paradox. History shows us that while gerrymandering can suppress, it cannot erase the underlying reality. Communities continue to grow. Voices continue to organize. The maps may distort, but they cannot hold back change forever. Crockett herself embodies that tension cut down early in her congressional career, but unbowed. Her career is not over. Her voice is not silenced. But the cost of this fight is borne by ordinary people. And that is the tragedy. To understand what's at stake, you have to look into the faces of those who lose representation. The elderly, voter whose district number changes but whose hospital doesn't, the college student fired up for change, now placed in a district where her candidate has no chance. The single mother working nights, wondering why the childcare funding she fought for vanishes in legislative negotiations. This is the human cost of lines on a map. And yet, those who draw them will tell you it's all fair, all legal, all part of the game. But democracy is not a game. It is a covenant. And when that covenant is broken, when communities are erased, the damage lingers far beyond one election cycle. Jasmine Crockett's district is gone, but the fight it represents is not. And the question now is not whether gerrymandering will continue at will, but whether the people most affected will find ways to fight back stronger than ever before. Because if they do not, the mapmakers win. One map, one vote, one decade, that is the cycle in which power in America is decided. And in Texas, that cycle has once again shown its teeth. Jasmine Crockett's erased seat is not just a quirk of cartography, is a wound layered on top of generations of political manipulation. To understand it, you have to look back at the history of Texas maps, at how race and politics have always been intertwined in this state. After the Civil War, when freedmen first gained the right to vote, Texas lawmakers responded with barriers, from poll taxes to white primaries, designed to contain black political power. When those tools were outlawed, the weapon shifted. District lines became the new frontier of control. Fast forward to the 1970s, the Voting Rights Act was supposed to change everything. It gave communities of color legal ammunition to fight maps that diluted their voices. and for decades, Texas was under federal supervision. Every line change scrutinized, every district tested against history. But when that safeguard was stripped away in 2013, the old habits returned with a vengeance. And it is in that context that Jasmine Crockett's seat disappeared. Her rise was improbable but symbolic. A black woman from Dallas, sharp-tongued and unapologetic, stepping into Congress as part of a new generation of Democrats willing to clash openly with Republican orthodoxy. She was not a quiet backbencher. She was loud. She was fierce. She was visible, and in politics, visibility is power. But visibility also paints a target. When the new maps came down from the Texas legislature, observers noticed immediately that districts in Dallas and Houston areas, where people of color were driving growth, were being reconfigured in ways that shored up Republican dominance. Communities that should have gained influence saw their power splintered. And in the process, Crockett's seat, once a rallying point, was swallowed. Republicans insisted they were following the rules. "We don't draw maps based on race," they said. "We follow the law." But data told another story. Analysts showed how minority-heavy areas were cracked apart, while Republican-leaning suburbs were stitched together with surgical precision. It was a classic playbook: protect incumbents, neutralize challengers, lock in power, and Jasmine Crockett's elimination was collateral damage, perhaps to some the point. But let's pause here, because the numbers and legal jargon can obscure the human stakes. Think of Oak Cliff, a historically black neighborhood in Dallas. For decades, its residents fought to have their voices heard, to send someone to Congress who understood their struggles. With Crockett, they did. Now, fractured across multiple districts, their collective strength is diluted. Or consider immigrant families in Dallas County who have long lived underrepresentation despite paying taxes, building businesses, raising children in communities too often overlooked. They found in Crockett a champion who spoke of inclusion, of fairness, of opportunity. Now, that representation has been erased. This is not just political strategy, it is lived reality. A district is more than lines. It is a community of shared interest, of shared future. When you erase a district, you erase that shared identity from the halls of power. You silence the megaphone that once amplified it. That's why Crockett's fight has resonated so deeply. She is not just fighting. For her own career, she is fighting against a system designed to predetermine outcomes before a single ballot is cast. And she is not alone. Across the country, black lawmakers, Latino lawmakers, Asian American lawmakers have seen their districts redrawn out of existence or carved into impotence. It is a nationwide strategy, one that thrives in shadows, in legislative chambers, in court filings. And yet, the resistance continues. Lawsuits pile up. In Texas, multiple challenges are moving through federal courts. The Department of Justice argues that the maps violate the Voting Rights Act. Civil rights groups document in detail how communities of color were targeted, but here is the sobering truth. Even if the courts eventually side with the plaintiffs, elections will have already taken place under the contested maps. Policy will have already been made. Judges move slowly, legislators move swiftly, and ordinary people live with the consequences. Jasmine Crockett has framed this not just as a legal battle, but as a moral one. She has said that representation is the foundation of trust in democracy, and when that foundation is shaken, faith collapses. If people believe their voices do not matter, they stop showing up. And when they stop showing up, democracy dies, not with a bang, but with a quiet withdrawal. That is the danger of redistricting abuse. It is not just that elections are rigged, it is that citizens lose faith in the very idea of elections. And yet, history tells us something else too. Suppression breeds resistance. Every time power has tried to silence communities of color in Texas, those communities have found ways to push back through marches, through lawsuits, through organizing, through sheer persistence. Crockett's erased seat may feel like a loss, but it could also be a rallying cry. The story of power in Texas has always been contested, never settled. And the same is true now. The map may be drawn, but the future is not. That tension, the weight of suppression, and the fire of resistance is the essence of this moment. And it is why Jasmine Crockett's elimination is more than a local story. It is a national warning, because if this can happen in Texas, where growth is undeniable, where diversity is explosive, where communities of color are reshaping the very identity of the state, then it can happen anywhere. The question is not whether it will. The question is how long communities will endure before the demand for justice becomes unstoppable. For now, the maps hold. For now, Crockett's district is gone. But history is long, and the fight is far from finished.